Johanna Spyri's Heidi, adapted by Florence Hayes, illustrated by Erika Weihs. One clear sunny morning in June, two figures could be seen climbing a narrow mountain path in the Swiss Alps. One was a tall, strong-looking girl named Diet, the other a 5-year-old child whom she was leading by the hand and whose little cheeks glowed bright red through her sunburnt skin. And this was hardly to be wondered at, for in spite of the hot June sun, the child was bundled up as if to keep off the bitterest frost. After an hour's climb, they came to the hamlet of Dorfli, halfway up the mountain, which had once been Diet's home. Heads popped out from all over the doors. "Hello, Diet. Where are you going?" her old friends wanted to know. Diet did not pause to reply. She held tight to the child's hand and hurried on. But when her friend Barbel called, "Wait a minute, Diet. If you're going up the mountain, I'll walk with you." Diet stopped. The child immediately let go her hand and sat down on the ground. "Are you tired, Heidi?" asked her companion. "No, I'm hot," answered the child. "We shall soon get to the top now. You must walk bravely on a little longer and take good long steps, and in another hour we shall be there," said Diet. Now Barbel joined them and walked on ahead with Diet, while Heidi wandered behind them. "Where are you off to with the little girl? It's your sister's child, isn't it?" asked Barbel. "Yes, I'm taking her to live with her grandfather," Diet answered. "With the Alm uncle?" "Diet!" exclaimed Barbel. "Have you lost your senses? You know what he's like. Everybody's afraid of him. He'll make you take her home again." Diet tossed her head. "He can't do that. He's her grandfather. I've taken care of the child since her mother died, and I'm not going to give up the good position I've been offered just for her sake. And I certainly can't take her with me." "Why, where are you going?" "To Frankfurt," answered Diet. "Well, I'm glad I'm not that child," exclaimed Barbel. "The old man up there looks wild, with his bushy brows and his great beard. He never sets foot in church. And when he comes down to the village, everybody keeps out of his way. He's her grandfather, and he's got to take care of her," Diet insisted. "Why does he live as he does?" asked Barbel. "They say when he was a young man, he got in with evil company and lost his farm and everything he had," Diet answered. "His parents died of grief. Then he himself disappeared, and nobody heard from him until years later. He came back with a young son, Tobias. When he found all doors closed to him, he moved to Dorfli." "Why is he called the Alm uncle?" Barbel wanted to know. "Our family called him uncle because his son was married to my sister Aldehyde. And soon the whole village called him uncle. When Tobias was killed in an accident, leaving my sister and Heidi alone, people said it was a judgment upon the uncle. He grew bitter and moved to the top of the Alm mountain, vowing he would never come down. That's why people call him the Alm uncle." "Well," exclaimed Barbel when she heard this, "how you can take the child to live with them, I don't know. As this, she turned toward a little hut in a hollow and said, "I have to stop here to see about some spinning. Good luck." Trailing behind Deet and Barbel while they talked, Heidi had made friends with a young goat herd, Peter, who lived in a hut halfway up the Alm. Peter was 11 years old. He knew many places where there were good shrubs for his goats to nibble, and he was in the habit of leading his flock aside from the beaten path. At first, Heidi had watched Peter as he sprang nimbly here and there on his bare feet, driving his goats up the steep mountainside. Then she tried to follow him. It was hot, though, and her clothes were too heavy. All at once she sat down on the ground, and as fast as her little fingers could move, began pulling off her red woolen scarf and her shoes and stockings. Then the dresses came off, all the dresses Deet had put on her to save the trouble of carrying them. Now Heidi stood up, clad only in a light petticoat, and stretched out her little bare arms with glee. She put all her clothes together in a tiny heap and went jumping and climbing after Peter and the goats. Deet was very cross when she saw what Heidi had done and scolded her. She made Peter go back and pick up the clothes and carry them the rest of the way. At the end of another hour's climb, Heidi and Deet and Peter reached the Alm uncle's hut on the top of the mountain. On a bench before the hut sat the old man, smoking his pipe and looking over the valley below. Heidi went straight to him and said, "Good evening, grandfather." "What's the meaning of this?" he asked gruffly. "Good evening, uncle," said Deet, stepping forward. "I've brought Tobias's little girl to you. I've done my duty by her. Now you must do yours." "So," said the old man, "what can a child do with me up here? What if she begins to fret for you?" "That's your affair," retorted Deet. "If harm comes to her, you will be answerable." At that the old man rose, his eyes flashing. "Be off with you," he thundered, "and do not let me see your face again in a hurry." "Goodbye, then," said Deet quickly, "and goodbye to you, too, Heidi." And she turned and almost ran down the mountain. While the Alm uncle sat down to think, Heidi ran off to investigate her new surroundings. She peeped into the shed where the goats were kept. She went behind the hut to the tall fir trees and listened to the wind blowing through their branches. When she came back, her grandfather was still sitting on his bench, puffing away at his pipe. She walked up to him. "What is it you want?" he asked. "I want to see what you have inside the house," answered Heidi. "Bring your bundle of clothes in with you," he said, rising and opening the door. "I shan't want them any more," was her prompt answer. The old man turned and looked at her. "And why shall you not want them any more?" he asked. "Because I want to go about like the goats, with their thin, light legs." "Well, you can do that if you like," said her grandfather. "But bring the things in. We must put them in the cupboard." The hut had only one large room. Heidi took it in at a glance. The table, the chair, the old man's bed, the kettle hanging over the fireplace. A door in the wall opened into a cupboard. On one shelf were dishes, on another bread, cheese, and dried meat. On the third, the uncle's clothes. Heidi pushed her bundle to the back of the shelf. She looked carefully round the room and asked, "Where am I to sleep, grandfather?" "Wherever you like," he answered. She saw a ladder that reached to the floor above and quickly climbed up. There was a hay loft with a large round window overlooking the valley. "Oh, it's lovely. I shall sleep up here, grandfather," she called down. "But I'll need a sheet." And she began to gather the sweet-scented hay. Together they arranged a bed, with hay for a mattress and 2 thick sacks for a sheet and a cover. "I wish it were night so I could get into this lovely bed now," Heidi said. "Hadn't we better eat first?" grandfather asked. Heidi followed him down the ladder and watched him go to the hearth and swing the kettle over the fire. Then he put some cheese on a long fork and held it over the flame, turning it until it was toasted a nice golden yellow. Heidi set the table. "What will you do for a seat?" grandfather asked. Heidi ran to the hearth and fetched a small 3-legged stool, but it was so low she could not reach the table. Grandfather filled a bowl with warm milk, set it on the chair, and drew it up before Heidi, where she sat on her low stool. Then he laid the toasted cheese on some bread and told her to eat, after which he sat down on the corner of the table and began his own meal. Heidi soon emptied her bowl. "It's the best milk I ever drank," she said. Grandfather filled her bowl again. When they had finished eating, Heidi followed him out to a shed, where he began working with his tools. Soon she saw he had made a 3-legged stool, like his, only with longer legs. "It's for me, I know," she said, delighted to have something of her own. Evening came, and the wind sang through the fir trees, louder than ever. Soon Heidi heard a shrill whistle, and down from the heights came Peter and his goats. Heidi ran outside to see 2 of them come up to her grandfather and lick the salt he held in his hands, as Peter and the others disappeared down the mountainside. "Are these 2 ours?" asked Heidi excitedly. "Yes," said grandfather. "Their names are White Swan and Little Bear. Go get your bowl and some bread." And when he had told Heidi to eat and run off to bed. "Good night, grandfather," Heidi called, as he took his goats to the shed. A few minutes later she climbed the ladder and hurried into bed. Before you could spell her name, she was sleeping as happily as a princess on a silken couch. The next morning a loud whistle woke Heidi. Hearing her grandfather's voice, she jumped up, dressed, and hurried down the ladder. There stood Peter with his goats, waiting for the uncle to bring his to join them. "Do you want to go up the mountain with Peter?" asked grandfather. Heidi was delighted. "Then wash and tidy yourself," he said, "or the sun will laugh at you." He put a large piece of bread and cheese for Heidi into Peter's lunchbox, handed him a bowl, and said, "Milk 2 bowlfuls for her at noon, and take care she does not fall over the rocks." As they started up the mountain, Heidi dashed this way and that to look at the beautiful flowers. Sometimes she would run ahead and sit down in a field of blossoms, and Peter would have to call to know where she was. "She's as bad as the goats," he grumbled. "Now I must watch them and her, too." When they came to the place where he usually halted his goats to pasture, Peter laid his lunchbox in a hollow so the wind wouldn't blow it away, and threw himself down for a nap. Heidi filled her apron with flowers, then sat down beside him. How beautiful was the snow in the peaks! How beautiful the green valley! And she had never seen so many flowers in her life. Peter's stomach soon told him it was time to eat. So he sat up and opened his lunchbox. He had laid Heidi's bread and cheese to one side and his to the other. Then he filled the bowl with white swan's milk and called Heidi. She drank 2 bowls of milk, but she broke off only a small piece of bread. The rest and the cheese she handed to Peter, saying, "You may have it." He thought at first she must be joking. When he saw what she meant, he set to it on the biggest lunch he had had in a long time. Much later, Heidi saw that the sun was casting a reddish glow over the peaks, the snow and the flowers. "Peter, isn't it beautiful?" she cried. But Peter had no eye for sunsets. He had seen too many. "It's time to go," he said. Just then he caught sight of one of the goats taking leaps in the direction off the cliff, and dashing up to it, lifted his stick to give it a good beating as punishment. Heidi cried out, "You have no right to touch her. It will hurt her. Let her alone." "I'll let her off if you will give me some more of your cheese tomorrow," said Peter. "You shall have it all, tomorrow and every day, but you must promise never to beat any of the goats," Heidi said. "All right," Peter promised. "I don't care." Day after day, Heidi went up the mountain with Peter and his herd. She grew healthy and brown in the sun, and as carefree as the birds. At last fall came, and with it heavier and stronger winds. Often grandfather would say, "You must stay at home today, Heidi, or the wind will blow you over the rocks." Peter did not like this. He hated to miss that extra lunch. Besides, the goats had grown so used to Heidi that they would refuse to go unless she was with them. But she did not mind staying at home. She liked following grandfather about, watching him making cheese or working with his tools. Finally, it grew so cold that she had to put on the shoes and stockings she had hidden in the cupboard. Then one morning a blanket of snow lay over the mountain. Now Peter and his goats stopped coming altogether, for there was not a green thing to be seen. It snowed until Heidi thought the hut would be buried in it. Then one day it stopped, and grandfather went out to shovel paths. That afternoon there came a thump at the door, and in walked Peter. The elm uncle invited him to stay for supper. How Peter's eyes popped when the old man handed him some bread with a big piece of meat on it. Then he had finished eating. Peter said, "I must go now. Grandmother sent word that she would like Heidi to come and see her one day." Almost as soon as Heidi was up the next morning, she announced, "I must go to see Peter's grandmother today. She will be expecting me." Grandfather told her to wait until the snow was not so deep. But each day she said the same thing. On the 4th morning, the snow was hard as ice. All right, then, Grandfather said this time. Come along. He wrapped Heidi in the heavy sack from her bed and dragged the sled out of the shed. Then he sat on the low seat, took Heidi on his lap, and pushed off with his foot. They shot down the mountain so fast that Heidi thought they were flying. When they reached Peter's hut, Grandfather said, "As soon as it begins to grow dark, you must come home." And he went back up the mountain. In the hut, Peter's mother was mending his coat. The old grandmother sat in the corner spinning. Heidi walked up to her and said, "Good morning, Grandmother. I've come at last." "It's the child who lives with the elm uncle, isn't it?" the grandmother asked, pleased that she had come. As they talked, one of the shutters flapped against the window. "See that? It will break the window," Heidi said. "Grandfather must fix it." The grandmother said she could hear it slap and feel the old house shake. But she could not see anything, for she was blind. That made Heidi very sad. "Who can make it light for you again?" "Can no one do it?" she cried. It took the grandmother a long time to quiet her. Heidi stayed at the hut until Peter came home from school. "How is the reading getting on?" asked the grandmother. "Not very well," was Peter's answer. The old woman sighed. "Ah, well," she said. "I hoped you would have something different to tell me. Up there on the shelf is an old prayer book with beautiful songs in it, which I have not heard for a long time. I hoped that you would soon learn enough to be able to read one of them to me sometimes." When it grew dark, Heidi said, "I must go now, but I'll come tomorrow." Grandfather met her outside, wrapped the sack around her, and carried her up the mountain. Heidi told him about the flapping shutter and the shaky house. "We must go tomorrow with the hammer and fix it," she said. "Who says so?" Grandfather wanted to know. Heidi told him that nobody had said so. She knew it herself. The grandmother lies awake when the wind blows because she is afraid the house will fall down. She is blind, too. You could help her, couldn't you?" "At least we can fix the rattling," Grandfather said. And the next day, when he and Heidi went down to the hut, he took along his hammer and nails. In fact, every time he went down, he took his tools along and spent many hours making the cottage sound and tight. He would never go inside, though, even to be thanked for his work, for he did not believe people ever meant to be kind. When he was finished, the hut no longer groaned and rattled the whole night through, and the grandmother said she would never forget what the elm uncle had done for her. Join me next time for more adventures.